to the Next Normal podcast. We engage in conversations with experts from various industries to help you to future-proof yourself for a rapid changing world. We can't predict the future, but we can curate insights to help you prepare for what the next normal might look like.
We have as our guest today Abdullah Snobar, the Executive Director of the DMZ and the CEO of DMZ Ventures, who will join us in a conversation on the future of startups and the startup ecosystem. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So our first question is going to revolve around something that a lot of people consider a large part of the startup culture, which is incubators and accelerator programs. Could you paint us a picture of how these are evolving and how new trends such as remote working are changing the landscape?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. And I think, it goes without saying that the times that we're in today has been quite challenging, frustrating, opportunistic, exciting in many different regards. But to say the least, I think everybody's had to learn how to adapt. And that goes in particular with incubators and accelerator programs as well. I think one thing certain for sure is the fact that driving value for startups has become the ultimate priority. How do you ensure during these times that we're doing as much as we possibly can to support startups and founders in their journey to continue existing, to continue to grow, to be able to understand opportunities as they come? One of the biggest things that's changed over the past little while is around virtual programming. It's funny, I used to speak quite a bit about pre-COVID, the fact that space was essential because it changed behavior. And a lot of our early days, we built our community based on the fact that we had a physical space for people to gather and meet and intersect and collaborate. And what COVID has actually kind of brought to the table now is that lens that we can continue doing a lot of that same work, but doing it virtually. And the fact that everyone had to do this at the same time actually helped the perspective around that. So I think virtual programming and how we support companies and where we support companies in terms of geography is no longer limited to just Toronto or Canada or North America. We're actually able to kind of push our resources across the globe because of access to new virtual kind of programming. We're seeing a lot more happening on the fact that we can build programming focusing specifically on COVID-19, and how do you help startups either position themselves to build something supporting primarily COVID-19 and crisis management and pandemic management, or B, retooling some of their existing technologies to do exactly that, and supporting companies to maintain a level of growth and momentum during the difficult times. So, those are two of the bigger kind of more micro issues. On the macro level, I think we're noticing that whether they were set up for it or not, incubators and accelerators are now focusing a lot more time and energy on lobbying government on behalf of startups and behalf of the innovation economy to ensure that governments really understand what needs to get done and are listening to the founders' problems and concerns during these times, and that we're able to actually establish more connectivity between the community at large. One way we've done that more recently, we co-founded an organization called the Innovation Economy Council, along with Mars and Communitech here in Canada, to really help us understand the need on what startups and founders need, not just today, but even post-pandemic, which is becoming a more discussed matter because we want to be prepared for what's to come.
That's brilliant. And I'm happy that you brought up the newfound role of lobbying the government on behalf of startups, and that being part of incubator/accelerator programs. On that note, I know that the CEO of Mars Discovery District had penned a piece in Globe and Mail saying that Canada's economic future depends on its startup. And for the context of our listeners, Toronto alone had created some 10,000 tech jobs last year. And for every tech job that's created, there's a spin-off of 4 additional jobs. Can you tell us a little bit more, understanding that there are countries like Germany and France and Britain that have done some provisions for startups and their support in COVID-19. What is Canada doing? What is the Canadian government doing? And what would you like to see them do?
Yeah, well, let me tell you right off the bat, I think the Canadian government and provincial governments and essentially all levels of government have realized that we built so much momentum, over the past decade, as you so well described in Canada, with regards to, tech and small business, and being able to develop such a narrative for the nation that really has become more globally attractive for investment and for immigration and whatnot. And I think that momentum continues on, and we're making sure as much as possible that we don't let go of that. One thing we've seen in particular on the federal level is that they're making a lot of deposits into the Canadian innovation economy. And I think that's very welcomed in many different respects. One message that's been made very clear, which I'm very proud of, is the fact that we want to really push on the buy local message. How do we ensure that the Canadian government, being the first, along with all the other corporations and organizations across the country, are focusing on buying local? The fact that the Business Development Bank of Canada, it's a crown corporation and a bank that's owned by the federal government, is now putting in billions of dollars of investments and loans into Canadian companies and startups to ensure that they maintain operation and they can actually stay level-headed during these uncertain times. The fact that we are pushing out high level of procurement opportunities for Canadian companies, I think all this kind of goes along with the message of we need to ensure that we do as much as we possibly can, if not more, because we realize that Canadian innovation is taking a leap and moving ahead of many other countries. And we don't want to lose that momentum. I think Young spoke really nicely to it, and we want to make sure that we maintain that message. And if we created 10,000 jobs just last year, how can we make sure that in the next couple of years we double, triple, quadruple those numbers to ensure that this becomes a real economic driver for Canada?
That's amazing. And on that note of buying local, can you give us an example of corporate Canada or the government buying local that warmed your heart?
Well, I think there's so many examples of this right now, right? If you look at what's been happening just generally with COVID-19, the amount of companies that have retooled their businesses to focus more on developing PPE equipment, and the Canadian government, primarily buying from Canadian companies on that front rather than going abroad, has been fantastic. We're seeing technologies that actually help with social distancing, rather than looking toward the US technologies that are also developing quite a bit. I think the Canadian government is actually saying we want to make sure that we can leverage Canadian tech right here at home to support us. Looking at procurement opportunities and partnerships with the Canadian government and groups like Shopify has been fantastic to leverage their point of sale system to help small to medium enterprise being able to completely divert their current brick and mortar practice to an e-commerce platform. Has been, again, these are just little side things that are happening that have allowed us to take, what was once maybe a dream, or maybe even just a long-term plan, and we've accelerated it to become part of our everyday practice today.
With that, I do also want to add, it was noted that the Canadian government gave Digital Main Street $57 million in investments to help their Shop Here program. And I think that goes to show that they are valuing and seeing the value of local businesses, which is great.
Yeah, look, I can tell you one thing. The governments on all three levels have done one thing very well, which is listening. Look, they had to roll out programs early on. They had to move quite quickly and rapidly. This is unusual for a government entity to do. Like when we talk about government, usually we talk about like the programs that have been set up today would have in any normal circumstance taken maybe years, 2, 3, 4 years to do, and they had to roll these things out in literally a month. For a government to also challenge itself to do that and roll these things out, they realize that there's going to be a lot of improvements needed, and they're listening. And as feedback comes in, they're retweaking and they're repositioning how and for who these programs are meant for, and they're making it easy. Giving credit to all the government entities today, they've all been able to adjust and adapt to the circumstances. And nobody's coming at this from a political perspective. This is really about building and continuing to build Canadian businesses and supporting where possible. And it's a commendable message on all fronts. So
I know you mentioned governments moving much quicker and moving more with much more agility, and that's not necessarily what we associate with governments, but we do generally associate that with a startup and ecosystem. We generally think about agility and quickly pivoting and embracing disruption and expecting the unexpected. On that note, what are some of the skill sets that people need to have if they're going to thrive in the tech startup world of the future? And what are some of the resources or influencers that you think they should be listening to?
First off, I think people need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. Like, they have to get used to the fact that there's so many unknowns coming through on a regular basis. And the fact that we're flattening the curve with COVID-19 does not mean that we'll go back to normal. We'll be shifting back to a new normal. And that means that we need to be able to adapt to trends. We have to think about how consumer behavior might change in terms of workshop, travel. People have to really consider the fact that we need to be able to collaborate across multicultural, diverse, and international geographies that's going to become the new way beyond what it was before, probably a new exaggerated way of living. You have to be able to understand people should take advantage of the free resources that are actually available to them here locally and globally. And the fact that this is going to be an opportunity to look at what is the gaps in the market and how we can actually position ourselves to move fast to service those gaps and be able to create a market from it that would hopefully create some sort of value add to either businesses or to nonprofits or to governments. So I think it's going to be, the main message here is that just being comfortable with the uncomfortable, or knowing what you don't know is going to become a big part of the equation moving forward.
In terms of being comfortable with the uncomfortable, there's also a very common quote that says, "Out of disruption comes innovation." And with more than 50 tech unicorns being founded during the recessionary years, such as Uber and Airbnb, and now half of companies on the Fortune 500 being founded during recession or a bear market, where do you think the next 50 tech unicorns will be coming out of during this financial downtime?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's always, as a saying goes, never let a crisis pass by. And I think in the past, after the 2008 financial crisis, as you mentioned, there was such unicorns as Airbnb and Uber that kind of came to life. And not just that, there's also been so many programs through government. For many people don't know, even in Canada, employment insurance was actually a program that was developed back in one of our former crises that happened. And it's a program that actually maintained up until today that supported millions of Canadians who were out of a job or who lost jobs. So I think there'll be lots of new progress and programs that come out of what we're facing today, generally speaking. That being said, I think what we're looking at right now is the fact that you'll realize that a lot of traditional industries that maybe didn't necessarily adapt to being virtual or being high tech industries are going to have to change very quickly. Generally speaking, that just because of the way that the world's shifting as well. So that's areas like the medical and health space, areas like the legal world, even looking at banking more so than what it was before. All these industries will need to be able to align itself to adapt to the changing markets and being able to actually stay current and relevant. Potentially companies that address gaps or inefficiencies in society that COVID-19 has brought to light. So products and services that can be consumed virtually, that can help us work from home and that can make contactless delivery possible, will become huge and massive trends as well that will probably pick up and see a large uptake. I think education will fundamentally change for forever. This will not be a short-term move where classes will go virtual. I think you will see some of the greatest and biggest institutions in the world changing their model because they have to now, because we've realized something in the past 4 months that I don't think people would have ever been able to realize, which is education done virtually and from across, and not necessarily just in classrooms. We'll have to take a deeper position, but also what does it mean for people, for example, in the sciences faculty that need to be in labs? How can artificial intelligence and augmented reality play a big part into their experiences so that they maintain a level of connectivity with the program? So I'm excited to see, and on a personal experience, I'll mention this. Things like large events, i.e. weddings and conventions, will definitely change drastically in the next little while. And the reason why I say personal, my wedding was supposed to happen last weekend, and there was no wedding, obviously. And I think what we're seeing right now, and although I didn't participate in this, People are hosting virtual weddings and saving tens of thousands, or if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on what was once considered to be the norm is now just a small function with 5, 10, 15 people, with hundreds of people invited virtually. Those are, again, just a small glimpse of what could come out of COVID, right? Which we don't know. I think the one that will probably be impacted just in terms of dollar amount and in terms of how much capital has gone into it in the past is probably the real estate market. You look at commercial real estate as being a norm. You know, we all had to be in a physical office. For incubators and accelerator programs, especially with the DMZ, we prided ourselves off the fact that we had 50,000 square feet in the most expensive piece of real estate in the country, the Yonge and Dundas Square. And we even are considering, what does that mean moving forward? Do we need that space? Is that an essential to our survival or to the way that we run the operation? So, you know, let alone big banks and law firms and consulting firms, the changes that will happen there and how remote working will become way more accepted than it is today is exciting to see what kind of technologies will also complement those industries now as they make their shifts.
Congratulations on your upcoming wedding. I hope it doesn't happen virtually, and I hope you are able to have it in person. You've started to kind of paint us a picture of what the future might look like. And I'd love for us to dig a little bit deeper. We started off this conversation by talking about the last recession. Here we are 10 years later. So I'd love to get a sense of, if you had a crystal ball and wanted to predict it, you know, what the next 5 to 10 years might look like. We'd love to pick your brain on what you think it might turn out to be.
Well, I can tell you what I hope it will look like and what I would want to see it look like. I don't have the crystal ball, so but I think it's I want to see Canada being able to continue moving faster, adopting new technologies faster, with a much bigger appetite to take risk to support Canadian technologies and businesses. We want to be able to have a Canadian domestic supply chain, one that does not have a majority dependence on other countries, in particular our neighbors down south. We want to be able to advance industries that complement, intertwined with technologies that produced by what were once startup or small businesses. So being able to grow those areas substantially. And of course, as I mentioned before, made in Canada brands being recognized around the world as leading edge rather than just nice to have. So it's we want to make Canadian brands household names globally. Our momentum over the past years to continue pushing that message out. A lot of it goes back to speed and agility, and making sure that we kind of continue pushing that out and making sure that we are supporting Canadian businesses wherever possible.
For the governments, to your comment earlier about them listening to what companies and startups need, I feel as if there's also a conversation that's happening in terms of sustainability versus scalability. And a lot of people are now more focusing on ensuring that their business is sustainable. Do you think that's going to shift the way, for example, companies and organizations get their funding from either VCs or government entities? Like, there's going to be more focus on if they're going to be sustainable for the long term versus their scalability in the short term?
I think there's going to definitely be a shift around that without question. That being said, when you look at how investment happens right now, it happens on the basis that people want, venture capital wants quick returns on what they're doing, and they want it now. What we will likely see moving forward, I think, is a lot more of an emphasis around social impact funds being able to be created to support companies to drive sustainability long term. A lot of what you're seeing, around new innovations, is also focusing on social enterprise, not just for profit. Market consumption initiatives. So I think social impact funds will become a way of the future, allowing us to actually being able to leverage technology that focuses on the PPP approach, the people, profit, planet approach, that would actually focus on a lot more longevity than it is short term.
Amazing. And you've spoken a little bit more about kind of the mindset and potentially where we're going in terms of social impact bonds, about what the next normal might look like. If you were in a room, let's pretend this is a virtual room, and you were talking to aspiring startup founders today, what would be your advice that you would give them?
Well, first advice I'd always say is remain positive and always look at the glass half full and never half empty, and realize that everything happens for a reason. I would then get more specifically into saying that stay lean for as long as possible and making sure that you're actually adapting to market trends where possible. Sustainable growth overall is going to be key in a situation where you're actually building companies and building technology in particular. Take advantage of however many government grants and funding resources as possible that are out there. Listen to your customer now more than ever before, because the market will change. This is not going to be again, going back to normal. This is going to be going back to a new normal, and being able to really keep that into perspective. I think a big part is just not being afraid to experiment. There's an unfortunate reality that we always think about failure as being a negative thing. And we forget the wisdom of failure sometimes, and the beauty that failure actually brings along. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying go out there and fail by design. I'm saying go out there and experiment and try. And sometimes part of that process and journey means failure, but the failure itself is actually part of that journey, and it should be embraced and looked at for its wisdom more than anything else. And I think one of the biggest things to focus on as well is, you don't want to be set back negatively during a downturn like this. You want to be able to look at the fact that there's so much things, as we discussed earlier, that were born out of the last crisis that we faced in 2008, and that post 2020, hopefully there'll be so many more innovations coming to light. Forward thinking is going to be essential in all its forms moving forward.
Out of everything that you're seeing happening right now, what are you personally most excited about?
The future of business, I think. For me, just the fact that we have proven to ourselves that we can move this fast when nobody ever believed that they can move this fast is actually one of the most exciting things for me, because that's constantly the message that you hear, generally speaking, within traditional industries, to say, well, we love this, we realize the value in it, but we can't do it because we can't move as fast. Or you look at traditional industries and you see the fact that they're actually so far behind that even having a conversation with them wouldn't get you anywhere, because they have so much steps to do before they get to kind of where they want to get to. Prime example, you'd be shocked to know how many industries still use a fax machine. And I think that in itself has completely turned on its head since COVID-19. The fact that you can't use fax machines because people are not in physical offices anymore has just gotten people to that, what we call a phenomenon to use emails moving forward, right? I always use the analogy of a book here. And pre-COVID-19, I always said, if this was a book, we're likely on chapter 1 of this book, of maybe a 10 chapter book. I now actually just say that since COVID-19 has come, we've added an additional 10 chapters to the book. And now we're probably still on chapter maybe 1.5. Pace of what we're reading right now, hopefully will expedite quite substantially. So it's an exciting time, to say the least. And I got to say that knowing the talent that's actually existing in Canada, and what actually has been done over the past decade, only leads me to believe that we are on our way to some, again, exponential growth and huge opportunities within the Canadian innovation ecosystem. So I, for one, am optimistic, excited, and quite intrigued by what's going to be happening in the nation.
Amazing! You blew my mind with the fax machine example, and I love the analogy of the book. Sounds like coming out of this podcast and this conversation, it's really, how do we continue to make sure that we're looking forward? How do we ensure that we are experimenting as much as possible, and that we're really seeing the next normal as something to be worked towards and to read faster than something to sit in our rooms and cry about. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. No, and I'm excited about the normal will be the new normal, and that's something that we should all embrace and be really excited for. And I think the two of you are helping normalize that conversation quite a bit with things like this, because the world will change, and we want to make sure that Canada is part of that change.
Thank you for preparing us.
My pleasure.